and we have to make sure that the total units of housing should be developed based on the research, and also at the same time we have to manage the price of every single unit of housing. This kind of development for low income development, one corridor serve more units housing. Like in here we can see like one corridor serve 6 units. It means that one unit can have cheaper price compared to other housing blocks or towers. Like in here, pin tower type C, it's for low middle income, like one corridor serve 4 units housing. I don't want to go to this project to detail, just want to share a bit. Okay, this typical pin tower, it's for high middle income. And then when we have to develop many housing blocks or types in one development, we have to make sure that all the quality should be good, but at the same time, actually the material is not the same, because for housing for the poor, we cannot use so many expensive material, or we cannot develop to the layout to advance. But some housing for the high middle income family, we can develop something like more iconic, or you can use this as a icon for the development as well. Like in here, one corridor just serve 2 units of housing. Yeah, I just want to go to, and we in this kind of development also has landed house project as well. It's usually for the high income family. Like every unit of house has their own car park, has their own land, and so forth. I don't want to go into more detail. Okay, as I mentioned before, sometimes the large development can provide the more facilities. Like what I learned from the Lucille Master Plan, it's this kind of development in urban design scale. For Lucille in Qatar, the development is larger, not only the community facilities, but we also can provide the public transport, like proper, well-organized public transportation for this kind of development. The typical of co-production for this kind of development is usually the project manager, investor, and developer will work really close to the authority of the government, and they will hire architect, and the architect will get some permission regarding the design from the authority, and once the design is done, they will deliver the housing unit and development to the end users. China, that's hot in Qatar. We have to work with some software as well to reduce the temperature. And to, yeah, and here we also developed the concept of shared land. We have 5 types of development. Like we find that in Qatar itself, we have 5 types of communities who live really close to the historical way, and then community who live in modern way, community live in how to say, a very high lifestyle, and one communities are the expatriates. Yeah, this typical development. We cannot plant too many trees, because one trees will need one water tap. So in here we have to make sure one building should be really close to other building to be able to reduce 2-degree temperature of the environment. Want to go there? Go. Okay. And I'll try to skip this presentation. It's also happened in Istanbul. We have to develop something close with the culture of the community. This is typical of the co-production. Okay. And we also have to provide some facilities that really the community who live there. It's typical souk or a traditional market in there. Okay, after develop some housing building, actually, I decided to take a further study in Master of Human Settlement to put the focus on how to make house or settlement for the poor. And the nice thing from study at Master of Human Settlement in KU Leuven, I can actually so many issues and impact regarding to the house development. If you have an interest in some issues or key aspect in housing, especially for the poor, I would recommend to read this book because we can find so many insightful thing that probably we couldn't find before. Because sometimes when we talk about housing, we just talk about unit of house, but sometimes in some development, actually the housing can be start not from the unit of house, like for the example in here, the housing development can be start from the site and service. Like in here, the community try to develop sanitation, decentralized sanitation system, and from this kind of infrastructure, it can develop or can structure the informal building properly. This is the typical of the decentralized sanitation system, and there are so many examples as well. The housing development can be start from the shared kitchen and so forth. It's not always start from the one single unit of house. And also the nice thing I learned from Sigeruban, actually every single of us can experience loss, not because of the poverty, but in Indonesia as well, we face a lot of disaster as well. We can experience the loss of houses as well. Like in here, the nice thing for what I learned from Sigeruban, he can invent like very innovative materials. Material is quite light and cheap to develop shelter for communities who live in certain area. And also during my study in KU Leuven, I also find some insight regarding some innovative material as well. Like in here, we can find sandbag. I mean, like the materials is made by the sand collected from the area itself. They just need to bring the bag, and then they fill the bag with sand. And this kind of development effort built in some area post-war. And this is typical housing development in Singapore and China. And if we try to have a look or learn on some traditional housing or settlement in Indonesia, actually, the nice thing that I find would be like, actually people in the previous time, they can build the house by collecting the material from the nature of the forest. But once nowadays, people no longer have access to collect the material in the forest or from the landscape surrounding the settlement, sometimes we can find qualities of the settlement or housing is getting worse and worse by time. Because it's no longer like in a previous time, they can freely to get some material from the forest. So housing is not related to the unit of house itself, but also the relation to the other area, like the traditional housing or kampung in traditional communities in Indonesia. They are strongly related to the forest as well. So they will improve the house, or they grow the house. They collect the material from the area surrounding the settlement as well. All the system inside the settlement, they collect from the nature. Okay, and this one as well. And in Indonesia, this kind of development probably will considered as poor quality, or it's considered as how to say, it's not a all the building built by bamboo or wood is not considered as a proper house. But for me, it's very amazing, like how the community built something from the natures. They collect the material from the natures, and they transform their landscape. For me, it's already a proper house. Yeah, probably we just see the condition is not good enough, but in my perspective, probably the worst quality nowadays is because also driven by the hard access for material from the nature and forest as well. But I think this is a very smart way of people to develop the house in Kalimantan, or South Kalimantan. We call it lanting house. It's a floating house. And also is two example. As we can see, house is not only a place to live, but if you can see in here, people do the economic activities as well inside their house. They make the clothes and they make fabric as well. In here, they work as fishermen as well, and so forth. So house is not only for daily activities, but also support that economic activities as well. Okay, on 2015 and 2016, actually, I have ever joined with one institution in Yogyakarta to conduct the research regarding to the housing shortage and housing backlog. I try to have a look on some issues regarding why some housing supply couldn't meet the housing need. Because we keep developing houses as well, but at the time, actually, the number of backlog is getting larger. And so many nice things that I found that actually, if we try to go to the point number third, actually, this one is the link from the research. If you want to read this research more, I can give you some the report. Actually, we found that we give some questionnaire to some people who live in some cities in Indonesia, and they can fill the questionnaire at that time. And then when we collect all the questionnaire, we try to read, and then we find that the majority people couldn't afford to have a house, or due to the abilities, like mostly the majority or in Indonesia, especially in some big city, they just can't rent a house. They couldn't buy a house. So I think if you try to go back to the previous presentation, try to compare between the Rusunawa program, the renting affordable house, and compared to the owning affordable house. I would prefer the Rusunawa will work better for Indonesia, because we try to have a look on a majority population in Indonesia, especially in this city, they just can rent a house. Actually, some young generation in here as well can feel like it's easy for us to rent a unit of house compared to buy a unit of house. And then share housing or land with share housing and land with parents. We find a lot of people who live in urban areas, they still live, they will add some unit of bedroom, but they will share the kitchen and then the guest house and the living room as well. So usually until 30, they still live together with the parents. And then another abilities would be the growing house. They will buy some cheap land at the suburb, or they will buy land in a kampung, in big cities or in a village, and they will build by themselves very small unit of house, and based on the growing ability of their economic, they will develop the house. So this is the three abilities that we found from our research in some big cities in Indonesia. And then actually, if we try to have a look on some other issues related to the housing backlog as well, we know that Indonesia, it can consider our population is like the fourth highest population in the world, like China, India, US, and Indonesia. And then we face so many challenges related to the growth of the population and the housing demand from year to year is increasing. Like we can have a look in here, like the growing demand every year, we need like 400,000 to 800,000 units per year. Based on BPS, it mentioned that 400,000 units per year. And then the total backlog is almost the same in Philippines. It's like 13.5 million housing units. And then we have to add with this growing demand every year. So it will getting larger and larger. And then the housing supply is considered lower than the housing demands in Indonesia. Another problem is the poverty. And mostly the population or the community who live in Indonesia have a formal jobs, mostly work in the informality, right? And there are so many people live in a very low minimum standard of living. So we face also the poverty as well. And then the migration from the rural to urban areas is considered higher compared to any other Asian countries. Like Indonesia is 4.1% is the migration of people from rural areas to urban areas. And nowadays we can find that no, it should be changed. People who in rural areas is 48%. I make some mistake in here. People who live in rural areas is 48%, and people who live in urban areas in Indonesia is 52%. So people live more in urban areas nowadays. And then also we face so many tsunami and earthquakes, and then slide land as well, and so many active volcanoes as well in Indonesia. So people experience lost houses as well in Indonesia. And based on some research done by the World Bank, also we can find in here, like we face the problem of the mortgage lending, like inadequate funding and poor design or system, like how to deliver the subsidies and the program from the national government to the community. And then like people mostly work in an informal, and then the standard of living is still lower than the standard in every region, and then lack access to the financial system because they don't have a formal job. So sometimes they have difficulty to access the financial system, and also the housing credit system as well. I think we have to improve, and the banking system, limited finance for the long-term mortgage, short-term deposit. Okay, I don't want to continue this. I'll just stop to here. Thank you very much. Terima kasih and maraming salamat. Risha, I've done for the presentation.
Sorry, Miss Vidya, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, we have a little problem with the internet connection suddenly.
So
Okay.
what should I do? Singing?
No, 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 no. Sorry. Well, maybe if you don't mind, since you still have 5 minutes,
Okay.
could you please repeat the last part that you
Outline.
present before? Yeah.
Okay. I still have 5 minutes. Wait.
Yeah, yeah.
Which one? This
Uh,
one?
yes, this
This
one,
one.
this one.
This one.
Yeah, this
Okay.
one we lost suddenly. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, Actually, this one is a shocks experience actually that I faced when I did internship in uh, California, USA, because I thought US is something looks like Catwoman's movies when the cities is very clean and nice and so many movie stars living there. But when I visit there, it's quite a shocks experience because I saw there are so many people live or they sleep on the street, and the number is not low, but it can be considered huge number of people who live on the street. I think if I have to say that the movies represent the US really close would be the pursuit of happiness when so many poor people try to find housing or place to live in every night. Like people walk um, from one building to another building. That is one experience when I finish my responsibilities or my duties in a day, and then I go out from the office, and then I find in the morning on the basement is full of the car, and then in the evening it suddenly changed from the car park to be the place for so many homeless sleeping there. uh, and I don't know, like slum is considered a solution or problem, because like if you try to have a look on some big cities in Indonesia, even some homeless still have one layer of how to say, one layer of how to say, board there, like one layer of board, or they try to create private space by collect so many materials from the surrounding. Yeah, the quality is probably not good, but actually they can at least create some private space. But in some cities in US, I just found that some people they have tent, but some people they don't have tent, or they don't have even one board to cover themselves. They sleep on the street furniture, they sleep under the trees, they sleep on the basement and so forth. And I just start thinking that probably the issues of housing problem is not only related to the poverty or the some issues that I mentioned before, because after visited some cities around the world, that a lot of different in terms of the economic system and the ideology, I just find that some cities or countries has neoliberalism or capitalism face more homelessness compared to, how to say, some cities has different economic system or the ideology. Like I saw a lot of homelessness. Actually, they are citizen itself in US, and then not quite a lot in Europe, but there is some. And also nowadays Singapore also experience. And before I couldn't find some homelessness in Singapore, but nowadays if you visit Singapore, you will also can find homelessness there as well. Um, and then in China as well, when they try to change the economic system to capitalism as well, they experience more homelessness. But it's something totally different with some other cities, like in Europe and in Middle East. Actually, the government put concern on the housing development for the citizen, and actually mostly the homelessness are refugee for other countries, not like in US. Mostly homelessness is the citizen itself. So the support from the government is really important as well. And the support of government is also related to the economic system and political ideology as well. So developing a housing or small unit house for the citizen is not as simple rearrange the bathroom and kitchen, but it's also strongly related to economic system, the political ideology, and then condition of the countries, and then poverty, and then of jobs, and then many other system like banking system, and then support system from the government, and then subsidy and so forth. I think that's all, Risa. Should I speak more?
Okay, thank you. Um, yeah, previously, we would like to say apologize for the problem that happened before. And thank you so much for Miss Vidya for the enlightenment. That also very interesting about what you already explained. And now we're going to the next session on discussion. I saw there are some participants who already write the question. Okay, I will read one question and then uh, Miss Vidya and also Mrs. Jocelyn will answer the question, and then we will next to the next question. Mrs. Jocelyn, are you also ready to answer the question? Okay. The first question is from Amabel Nikitalia Parangin. I would like to ask this question to both of the presenters. I have some question. First, in this pandemic era or new normal era, do you think it is better to build housing horizontally than vertically? The second question, according to pandemic COVID-19 protocols, which one do you think better and safer, living in low-rise housing building or high-rise housing building? And the third question, due to economic condition in the future, which one do you think more possible, housing for rent or housing for own? Thank you. So I think Mrs. Jocelyn can answer first. The question from Amabel.
So difficult. Your question is so difficult.
Okay, do I need to repeat? If I need to repeat the question, it's okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Miss.
Sorry. Okay. One of the question is, would it be better if we live in a horizontal or vertical house?
Yeah,
Yes.
in this pandemic era.
Yes. The question is, are there provisions for us to have a space where we can sanitize first before going to our living area in our main house? Meaning, if we live in a condominium, are there spaces that allows us not to bump with each other and provide space that would help us sanitize before we live in our houses? So it basically would dwell on us, designers, architects. How are we going to reinvent the spaces we have in our area? Uh, According to the second one is, where do you think it's safer to build in a low-rise house and a high-rise house? Uh, Again, it pretty much it's very dependent on where you live in. Like, there are areas that has to be several meters above ground because of, like, in the Philippines, where I live in Manila, it it's often gets flooded. So although the area I live in, we do not get as much flood as the surrounding community, but sometimes, like in UST, one of the sites where we had our triple A also with visa quadruple A, you would have flood there that could be as high as 4 meters. So these are the things that we have to look into. Would it be better to own a house or to rent a house? I remember a wise man telling me about owning a house. My father 30 years ago was telling us a house is a dead investment. It's a dead investment because you do not make money. Instead, although of course it would at certain point the value would rise and everything, but the house would also incur a lot of expenses in order to to have to get the upkeep. So what was he was telling us is that if you can combine your house, if your house can make money where you live in, then it would be better. So it's good to have a house, but when you have a house, it should also generate income for us, not just a house where we stay and we get the shelter. I don't know if I answer it. I answer it satisfactorily, Miss Amabel. But that's my perspective of having a house. So it has your house has to generate income for you also, not just a house where you live in.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jocelyn. And okay, next maybe Miss Vidya, you can give your own perspective about this question. It's quite interesting.
Okay, I think this one is not an easy question to say or just to answer which one is safer, because we have to put so many consideration. Like, I think this question also um, we cannot just directly answer, but we have to conduct research to be able to answer that kind of question. Which one is safer? But if you try to have a look on some data shared by some big cities, like we 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 found that some big cities in the world, like in New York and then Jakarta and some other big cities, experience more infected people, um, and affected. Some big cities will experience or mentioned as affected areas as well. But it cannot be said that the lower housing is safer than the vertical lower housing development is safer than vertical or higher or toward housing development. We cannot say just which one is safer, but we have really to conduct research regarding to that. But I have found some interesting point regarding this pandemic is there are so many important should be put as a consideration for the architects is we have to put the consideration on the standard minimum of living, as we know that if nowadays all the people or all the member of the family should live inside the units housing, like can we imagine if we try to have a look on some housing development in Hong Kong or some big cities in China where the unit is very small, we cannot imagine like how people can live properly, like when all the member of the family should live inside the very small units, and they have to do so many activities like work, educate their kids and so forth. And I just found that some cities that already put into consideration for the standard minimum of housing units, they can survive this condition. Like actually in Singapore, in some cities in Europe, in some cities in America, they already have like the standard minimum of units should be provided by every single unit housing development. Because as we know that so many cities around the world, usually they don't put into consideration when they develop housing units. Sometimes they just try to develop as small as possible the housing unit. And then when they have to face pandemic, they have to do activity inside the very small unit. Then all the member of family should live together. It become a problem. So now we have to put like what is the minimum of the standard living for people inside the housing unit when the pandemic is happening again in the futures. And then the other important aspect on the city scales, probably the size of the pedestrian. In previous time, we think that the 2.5 is enough for some big cities, like the white standard of the standard of the width of the pedestrian. But nowadays, like if we try to have a look, the gap between one person to another person during this pandemic time is minimum 1.8 to 3 meters. Can be considered if the street or the pedestrian is really narrow, so it cannot work. So we have to think what kind of pedestrian good to respond this kind of situation. But yeah, some cities have very good strategies, like they try to distinguish between two direction of people, so people can walk in a different direction in both of the pedestrian. But yeah, in the futures, when we develop or we design cities, we have to put the consideration what is the minimum standard of the pedestrian width should be to support if the pandemic will happen in the futures. And then and I just found that the balcony as well, have a look, but during the pandemic, a balcony is really very important aspect as well, should has by housing unit, especially for the vertical housing. For the landed houses is nice. Landed housing, sometimes you have a garden, you have an opening, but can you imagine if the vertical housing, the unit is very compact, it's very small, and then they don't have access to get out. And the only thing you have is just like very small corridor, and then you can meet people who live in other units really close. We have to put into consideration as well, like the balcony is like the place for people to escape for a while from their unit of house. And then we have to put the consideration of the number of lifts as well, because the elevator and the very narrow corridor also very strong related to the to drive more people to infect, or like the small the narrow corridor of the vertical housing, and then the elevator also can be space how to say, to like for the virus like how to say, people can get contact to other people or contact to the virus easily in a narrow corridor or a very small elevator as well. So in the future, people have to think about that as well. But if I have to say, some middle rise, like four level of housing will be as efficient, because like you still have a choice, like which one you want to go down by elevator or by staircase. But if you can, you imagine if you live like you live on the 30 floor of housing units, you won't use the staircase to go down. So the only option you have is going down by elevator, and people meet easily in the elevator. So we have to put consideration on how dense the housing should be, and then the width of the pedestrian, and then the width of the corridor, the number of elevators should support. And then if I have to say, like the 4 floors of housing still efficient, but the higher probably will face the problem.
Lisa, may I add a couple of things. The biggest concern now is how the developer would want to part with their money, because we know that if the hallways are narrow, then they make more money because they will be able to sell more space. So how are these developers willing to share their money to make housing more safe for everyone else? So it boils down to that also. But of course, as architects also, like if you're living in a 30-story building, would you design stairs that would lead after 4 or 5 story high? You can have a garden so people can walk, so it would not be very difficult for them to walk. We know that ramps are very expensive, although personally I would rather walk on a ramp rather than an elevator, even without the COVID. But again, are the developers willing to part with their money? And as architects, are we willing to tell them that this is what we need right now, and this might be the answer for the future also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think the first question is quite interesting to live the discussion. And the second, we also have a question from Agus. And this question is special to Miss Vidya. Uh, I guess you want to give a response about how people in the overseas are more comfortable to live in vertical housing. So, do people prefer living in a landed or vertical house in Indonesia based on the market? If we build a vertical house in relative small area or not in a urban area, so it's kind of suburban, is it possible to reduce the existing backlog in around that area?
It's quite difficult question to answer. Actually, it's also related to the land ownership. Uh, Indonesia, as we know, that the land ownership is not owned by the government, right? But there is some land owned by the government, some land owned by private, some land owned by the kingdom, some palace or kings in Indonesia. So in some countries, the land ownership is owned by the states. So to be able to develop some housing is not as easy as in Indonesia. As we know, in Indonesia, the developer is not only done by the government, but so many private sectors also can develop a house easily. They just need to do some collaboration with the landlord or some people who own the land. So sometimes the development is not easy to be controlled. And also in Indonesia, we can find that, like in Yogyakarta, we have so many infrastructures or infrastructure concentrate on the city centers. But a lot of people really love to live outside the urban areas, like because they still can find like cheaper, very cheap line outside the city center. They can develop the house outside the city centers. So sometimes people in Indonesia still have a lot of choice. I think that's the reason why it's quite hard to urge or to ask people and in vertical housing development, because people still have a lot of choice regarding about what kind of housing they want. And then there is a mindset in Indonesia, they will feel more secure when they own their own land. I think that's also, we have to change the mindset of that. Like actually, but if you try to have a look on Leuven, I would take an example in Leuven. Like you don't have a lot of this in terms of the housing development, like our housing unit. So you have to choose like the housing unit provided by the government and land use of the area. So people cannot develop the housing like in Indonesia, like they can develop housing everywhere. In some cities in Europe, they have a strong research related to the land use planning as well. And people cannot easily to build their house, and then the landed houses is very expensive, and then the legal aspect is very strict there. You cannot just change the land to be a house. It's really different in here. So in Europe, you can find that like level of house, single house, but it will be owned by 4 families. Because yeah, it's totally different within here. You cannot develop house easily. You just can choose whatever provided by the, how to say, by the government or by the institution there. And you have to face how to say, the legal aspect is very hard there, not like in here. Like sometimes you can develop a house without get any permission from the government as well. Like if you try to have a look, or you try to go to some village or some urban suburban in Indonesia, you will find the house without IMB, like the permission or the legal aspect. They already built a house without the legal aspect. Yeah, I think this is strongly related to the land ownership, and then planning, land use planning, and also strongly related to the control from the government regarding to the housing development as well. Yeah, Lisa, I have done. If
Okay, thank you. I think the next question from Agustina is also relate with the previous question that you just answered. Maybe the difference is about she asking about what do you think the obstacle to develop vertical housing? The question is for both of you, for Miss Vidya and also Mrs. Jocelyn. So maybe you can both of you can give your perspective about the obstacle to develop vertical housing in both countries. Okay, so who will gonna answer first? Miss Vidya will continue to answer the obstacle developing vertical housing in Indonesia.
Okay. Actually, it's related to the government, or it's related to the end users, or I have to answer.
I think it's based on the user, so based on the public, the citizen.
Why they don't want to live in the vertical housing, or why the vertical housing is not developed?
It's relate to the background and culture from from people mostly who live in a horizontal housing.
I think I need some times to find the answer for this kind of question. Mrs. Jocelyn, probably you have a right answer for this kind of question.
So, Mrs. Jocelyn, maybe you have your own experience or maybe your perspective about what the obstacle to develop vertical housing in Philippines, for example, maybe based on from the culture of the people, or because of the policy from the government.
Okay. Policy-wise, there are no obstacle because there are a lot of high-rise condominiums that are being built all over the city and all over the Philippines. The problem, I think, has to do with acceptability of certain age group. I remember I had a professor who was educated in a Western country, but refuses to live in a high-rise condominium, and he would always tell our class, that no amount of money would make him live in a high-rise building. So until he passed away, he lived in a two-story townhouse. So it has a lot to do with acceptance and awareness. The young people would like to live in a condominium because most of the condominiums are strategically located, meaning they just have to walk, then there's work, they just have to few minutes walk, then there's the mall. That's why it has to do with a certain lifestyle. Would I want to live in a condominium unit? Probably not. Probably not, because of the traffic, of, it's like a paranoia now that I don't want to be touching near other people. I would want my own space. So it has to be, with awareness. It has to be with a certain lifestyle that people can actually embrace. But sometimes also, you are not left much with choice. Like, uh, if you're working in a city, you would want to live in a detached house, but it becomes expensive if you cannot afford it. So we're sometimes forced in a situation because there's really no option. But for those who would option, for those people who would have option, it has a lot to do with the kind of lifestyle they want to live in. Thank you.
Okay. Uh, so how about you, Ms. Vidya? Have you found the idea about this question?
Actually, it's still hard to answer for me, because when I live in Leuven as well, when I have to choose between live in the city center or live in the more suburban, close to the forest, the community forest, I would prefer to live in a community forest, because I would say, like, yeah, I would say I would consider myself as villagers. I'm not familiar living when I get out from my apartment and then I suddenly see crowded. I don't want to, like, exposed to close by the crowded as well. So sometimes I would say, like the our childhood experience also shape our way of living strongly. Probably for some people who was born in the city centers, it's quite easy to live in that kind of environment. But for someone like me, who live in the natures and then who live in the kampung, who lives in the landed houses, and then I have to start to live uh, in like vertical housing, it's not easy. But when I lived in Singapore at that time, because I don't have an option, if I want to live in a landed houses, I have to pay very, very expensive. So the only option that I has living in the apartment or HDB. If I want to save my money, I have to live in HDB. It's vertical housing, and the apartment as well is it's a vertical housing as well. And I don't have a choice to live in landed houses, because the price landed houses in Singapore is very expensive.
Yeah.
So I start to experience and feel comfortable. So sometimes when you don't, if we don't provide any option, like we make the landed houses is very expensive, so some people don't have a choice. So the only option you have is living in apartment or HDB. Both are vertical housing, and then suddenly you will start to stay there, because in Europe and Indonesia you still can find like how to say, like the option of living. Yeah. It's not like in Singapore or in probably in Hong Kong and New York and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, that you're right. In Indonesia, it's still easy to find landed house. Okay, so we will move to the next question. I think I found interested question from Afrida. She said, as a junior architect who only follow other expert steps, would you like to give us some advice to not only concern about our mandatory job, but also beyond than this, such as how to think more sustainable to our project and how to start thinking about people who live in poverty? I think both of you have a similar experience about how to think more sustainable to our project. Okay, so Mrs. Jocelyn, you may start first to answer this question from Afrida.
Young starting architect, the tendency is for us just to follow what our bosses would say or what the developer would say in wanting to have a project. But what we can do is we should back whatever proposals we have in terms of design by a strong research. So if as a student and as a young professional, we make research as part of our practice, then when we decide to present a system, a concept to our clients, then if we are back with science, then it's easier for us to sell it. It's easier for us to sell our idea. Now, in spite of that, if we all have the data and the scientific research, and still the bosses doesn't want to hear us, then maybe it's time for you to find a work where you would have the same core value. It's always important that when you work with somebody, it's the same core value as you have. Otherwise, you would start losing everything, including yourself, and that's really very sad. Because as an architect, as engineers, as people in the built environment, we do not just affect one person. If you're a doctor, you make a mistake, then you probably would just kill one person. If you're a lawyer, then if you commit mistake, maybe you just have one person go to jail. But for us, in the built environment, there's so much responsibility, not just in terms of aesthetics, but also the way of life that we create for the users. Even the people who would be passing the building and who would see the building, we contribute to their stress if our building does not look good. So that's the kind of responsibility we have. So you have to find work that believes in you and that you also believe in. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
It's my time to answer this.
Yes. How about you?
Oh, okay. Actually, it's also related to my previous experience, because when I work in Singapore as well, I faced some big question at that time when I try to develop almost the same type of housing development, and I keep questioning if we like just develop housing for the rich, or we just develop something for the rich people or high income communities, so who will start to think about the community who live in very low or middle income. But actually, I really believe that every single of us has purpose, right? I will not say that people who work or develop housing for the rich is wrong, because we have both markets, right? We have both how to say, like we have both end users, typical. It's really depends on you, but I would like to give some advice, like as a young architects or young generation or young planner, we can keep questioning about our practice and career, do what I did is right or wrong, because actually I find some big question at that time. I just don't want to continue to develop something the same time, 2 times, and then in the end it's just an investment because for me, housing should be a house. I hope as an architect, I really like when I see the units housing developed by me. In the end, will be used by the end users as living space. It's not only an investment product. But if we try to have a look on some big cities, some very advanced developments, some fancy developments, in the end up as empty space or empty living space. It's just an investment. Yeah, I started questioning about that kind of practice. That's why I want to stop, and then I just want to continue my further study in human settlement. I keep questioning about my practice and my career. Do what I have done is right or wrong? But it's okay if you just want to continue to develop like the housing for investment. It's okay. It's not wrong. But it's just me. I feel guilty, and I feel I did some mistakes. That's why I want to stop that kind of development. I don't want to just develop like fancy building, but in the end, it's empty. That's also that I find some fancy building in many other countries, like developed by many star architects, end up empty as an empty space. Yeah, probably you will find it's very beautiful on a magazine, but if you try to have a look on the site, or you try to have a look, or you visit the development, and then you will find some units are just an investment. It's empty. For me, I just don't want to do something like that. That's why I try to answer my big question by try to continue my study in Master of Human Settlement, like how actually develop housing for the poor and have a settlement for the poor. And then you, as a young architect or planner, I would give some advice. Keep reading so many issues and aspects. Sometimes it can enrich your experience, enrich your career as well. So it's not only about like how fancy our design is. We have to think like how does it looks, how does it works, and how does it relate it to others aspect. We cannot just as an architect, I just want to develop something fancy. In the end, it's not used by human. It's probably used by the ghost, or it's just an investment product. And I just don't want to have that kind of building. I don't want to be an architect for that kind of building. And then you can also find a purpose actually. By find a purpose, you can have a very special career as well. Like like me, I just want to work for a building that really work, that really useful for the community or for people. That I just want to see my building is not empty. It's not like a work of art, but I want it should be occupied. It should be used by the end users. So that is my purpose in architects. I just want to create something and it's used by the end users. And then keep observe, like observe to many things. I think it's nowadays is quite easy. You just need to click YouTube and then try to observe some aspect related to what are your concern. Like when you try to ask something, you can find some issues aspect or anything related to your question. I think that's all, Risa.
Yeah, that's very good advice actually from both of you for all junior architect and student who attended the event today. And now we have the last question. Finally, the last question. We have I collect a question from three people because the question is similar from Agung, Isan, and also Theo. So the question is still related to vertical housing. They have uh, the similar worried about will the vertical house eliminate the culture in an area, or is it's possible if we lost the traditional building because of vertical house, and also how to promote living in the vertical, especially in rural area. So is it possible to answer to both of you? I guess Mrs. Jocelyn can start first to answer this last question. Masih.
Okay. How do influence people to live in vertical area? Is that a question? Or does vertical living
Will
corrupts the
will
culture?
eliminate the culture. Will eliminate the culture because of vertical living. So kind
Um,
of we will lose the traditional building because of vertical.
it, we really have to define things here, because when you say traditional, traditional in what sense? Because what we feel now is traditional might not be the traditional my great grandfather and grandmother feels traditional. So while we would want to the next generation to understand where we came from, we cannot also force them to accept what we are right now and what are traditions right now. Like during my mom's time, a man could not kiss a woman cheek to cheek, like casually. But now it has become a thing for us. Like when you see your friend, whether he's a man or a woman, you do cheek to cheek. But because of the pandemic, everything changes. No huggings, no kissing. So we have to define things. What is traditional now might not be traditional in the future, or might not be even traditional with our forefathers. Uh, what we have to learn is we have to learn to adjust to what we have. As a designer, I think the best thing is for us to really listen and not dictate to the user what we want. Because remember, we would be there for like 6 months, 1 year when we are doing the project. But these are spaces that people would live in, like what Bija has been telling us. These are for the people, not for our advertisement, not to perpetuate our careers, but for people who would be using it for a long time and maybe giving it to their children or their grandchildren. We just have to learn to listen to the dictates of time, and we build awareness. That's what is important, because if you are not aware, then you cannot really understand the flight. The only way for us to live harmoniously is for each one to learn to listen and to identify what can we contribute. Because we might be studying architecture like in the Philippines 5 years, 2 years in master, maybe 3 to 4 years in a doctorate degree, but it does not give us authority to dictate the spaces for our end user. So vertical might be the reason, horizontal might be a solution. There's no one fits all. There's unlike the dresses that one fits all, it's not for housing. It's very dynamic, and that makes our profession very interesting, because you cannot just say, you have a cough, you take this medicine. Yes, the
Yes.
solution is very different every single time.
Okay.
Although of course there are unifying elements like safety and all of these things, but okay, I hope I answered it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So next, Miss Vidya, for this last part for this discussion session.
Okay. I think I really agree with the answer of Mrs. Jocelyn. The answer the question, but I also want to add probably research as project is very important, I think. And as we know that Indonesia research and that data is something a luxury. This is hard to find. Like for one data, one data, for instance, you want to try to find like what is the number of rural areas in Indonesia. You will find two datas. So it's very hard, very difficult to find the right data in Indonesia. And then, and why I say research-based project is very important. So before you make a decision or you make a development, you have to initiate research, because the vertical housing can be a problem. Traditional housing also can be a problem. It depends. Where is the location? Like the slum area, it can be problem, but it at the same time, it can be solution as well. Like for instance, if you try to have a look on some issues related to slum, it's just slum. I just slum. In some area, it can be a solution. They can improve, like improve, and then in the future it can be something really good. But slum also can be a problem. It's really depend. We have to have a look on the many aspect as well. Like if you say that traditional house in Jakarta, and then probably you will say that vertical housing in very sustainable, like village area in Bali, it will be different. Probably some big cities, the vertical housing can be the only option that you can develop to respond, for instance, the huge number of demand for the like the housing demand. And then before you decide how to make people who live in rural area to live in vertical building, I would suggest that not all. I do not agree that vertical housing is better than traditional housing, or traditional housing is better than vertical housing. Both can be problem and both can be solution. It's really depend on the problem faced by both of typical building. It's just typical. So before you decide or before you develop which one is better, the traditional or vertical, you have to have a look at the problem. Something, but design is solve problem. So before you create something, you have to find the problem firstly. Once you find a problem, and then you try to develop solution. So design should be a solution, not a new problem. Like for instance, you develop vertical housing in the rural areas, which is very strongly connected to the natures. Actually, there is so many birds fly there, and we have to keep the level of building low. So the traditional building probably the solution for that kind of area. But if you have a look the issues faced by the Jakarta, it can be a vertical housing, but also probably the traditional housing as also have to live together the vertical housing as well. So design is a problem, should be a problem solver, not a new problem. I think initiate conduct initiative research before we make decision and we develop something is really important. So yeah, I think research-based projects should be developed more nowadays. I think that's all, Sha.
Okay. Thank you so much. And actually, there are still some question, but we run out of time for discussion session. And so, ladies and gentlemen, who still attended this session, once again, I would like to say thank you for all the participants, and also I would like to say thank you for both of our guests today. Yeah, if we are offline, it might be we already clap our hands, yeah. And that's very informative and interesting talk for this online session. Hopefully, the presentation will be beneficial for everybody. And thank you for your attention. And good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was like Very
Thank you very
interesting. Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay,
I,
for
I,
this,
I hope,
the MC will continue to close the event.
thank you.
So, Zahra?
Okay. Thanks to the speaker for an informative and insightful presentation. May it be useful for us. Ladies and gentlemen, while we're waiting for the list of the door prize winner, I would like to share some short story why I finally decided to join learning in Arsitektur Amikom. Amikom itself is famous with its digital image, where its animation works are well known and have received awards. That's why I'm sure Amicom has lecturers and learning concepts that are able to prepare us as the student to compete and survive in this digital era. And as we know, architects are now required to understand the digital world to what is that? To require more clients, to attract more clients. That's why I choose Amicom with its digital architecture, which I feel able to prepare me for being a professional architect. Wait a minute. I think I already have the list winner for the draw prize. Okay, now I would like to announce for the door prize. The first one is Amabel Niki Talia P. And the second one is Afrida Handayani. And for the winner for voucher, the first one is Tio Hakim Wiguna, and the second one is Agung Mulyawan SST. Anyone who win the door prize, please send us an email that has been written in the chat column to claim the prize. I will write down the email. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, finally we are in the last session of our program. Thanks for the speaker for an informative and insightful presentation, and thank you for all the participants today. It has been my pleasure to host this program, and see you. Good afternoon.